Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome back to another episode of Voice of Youth. Today we are starting off a little series per se. Just the next few episodes are going to be tackling this kind of overarching topic that we want to discuss and that we think it's important to discuss as youth. So today will be a soft introduction of sorts to this topic itself, and that is the topic about how cultures divide us, or if they do or if they don't. So today we have three guests, and they'll be joining us today. We have Sharanjit, Aman, and Jasdeep Kaur. So let's bring them on now. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. We're going in for the waves, no, but we laugh at that here.
Very like expressive.
So we'll get straight into it because this is such an important topic, and there's so much to cover. So we're talking about cultures, how they divide us, and it's not necessarily limited to cultures per se. And so when I say cultures, it includes religion, it includes maybe it's family traditions per se, because there are so many ways in which you can be torn between two different kind of aspects or two different lifestyles. So I've already brought up this topic with the three of you, so you could kind of have some time to think about it. And would you, Sharanjit, like to start off with, your point of view or your perspective on whether or not, youth are divided by the, different aspects of life per se?
Yeah. So this is a really good topic, actually. It's something that I feel like a lot of us will be able to relate to on some level. I think that cultures can divide us internally. So it leaves like a little bit of a, you're just sort of stuck in the middle thinking, am I going this way or this way? Like, where do my values align? That's kind of how I see cultures dividing us. As a whole, I think it's like, as a community, I feel like they also can divide us as well. We're very different from our parents. We grew up in Australia. We had an influence of not just like Western culture, we had the influence of many other cultures. So like juggling being a first generation Australia is like something that is a bit of a struggle for us youth. Yeah,
it is. Yeah. And let's focus on the community aspect and that overall aspect that you brought up there. Aman, do you have any thoughts on that yourself, or what's your perspective on it?
Yeah, I mean, similarly to Sharanjit, I agree. Like, I think cultures, although, multiculturalism is such a huge part of Australia and it's such a fantastic, facet of Australia, there is certainly, differences between cultures. And I think it's good to appreciate them, but also recognize them. I mean, like, from personal example, like, obviously with our Punjabi culture, and for myself, I actually grew up in New Zealand. And then when we moved to Australia, just the culture, even though it's like, two Western countries, the culture is still significantly different. And I think it makes the world like a beautiful place, having all these, enriching different cultures. But it is also something, growing up, you do have to navigate, especially when your own parents have grown up in a world completely separate to your own. So definitely it can be a challenge to kind of have a balance between those worlds. And I think that's something all of us have, gone through growing up as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing that I found interesting that you brought up is the multicultural aspect of Australia. And I remember whenever I was in, primary school or such, whenever you get told, like, you grow up thinking Australia's multicultural, but then when you get told, like, at least in my school, you get told, we're going to draw an Australian today or something, and then you draw, a stereotypical white bogan with a corkscrew hat, a VB in his hand, a singlet and everything. And Justin, what are your thoughts on whether or not, say in like the school environment, is there like some sort of prevailing idea that a school might divide people between their two cultures, or might it bring them together?
I think it could work either way. There's a lot of variables, a lot of factors that can contribute to which way a school might go. I personally have heard of examples where there are very multicultural schools who are completely accepting of other cultures. But then others have gone to schools that are not quite so accepting. So it really depends on the school and the values that school holds and the culture behind those schools. that I think will probably be the deciding factor for which way they want to swing in terms of multiculturalism.
Yeah, and that's very it's very similar to it's a parallel to the way we brought up family earlier, and how through parents and through other generations, these kind of ideas and these kind of cultures, change or grow or adapt to, the new environment we're in. So, I mean, you brought up New Zealand. I was just wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail. I don't know how old you were when you were over in New Zealand, if you remember much about it, but maybe some of the differences between, how Sikh or Punjabi culture is over in New Zealand compared to Australia.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up there. We moved to Australia when I was 13, so I have pretty good memories from New Zealand. And I think at the time it was still like, obviously with New Zealand being a much smaller country and a very small like Punjabi Sikh community over there, I think we were still at the beginning stages of kind of meshing those cultures together. So I think we were there at the beginning stages, and, at a time where there's no gurdwaras or anything, and you're doing, kirtan programs just with very little groups in your home. So, I mean, it was very much at the start of it all. And I mean, in general, though, I do want to mention a point about like the New Zealand culture as well, comparatively to Australia. Like, I had my primary education over there and up until nearly high school. And I think the significant difference I noticed personally was how welcoming in New Zealand they were to their Indigenous culture. So growing up, we were very, very well like taught about the Indigenous culture, like the Maori like traditions and culture, and we were even taught Maori in classes. Whereas when I moved to Australia, like culturally, I noticed it wasn't a big part of our learnings at school, and it wasn't something we were taught about. So I think there was this, I don't know what it is in Australia. We don't have as much of a connection, but maybe because it is, I feel like in Australia, because we have so many different facets of cultures, sometimes like the Indigenous one can kind of get diluted between, obviously there's such a wide variety of people in Australia. So I mean, that's something beautiful about New Zealand that certainly I think we can try to emulate, definitely. Yeah.
See, that brings up something interesting to me. Like, when I was like writing the topics for these episodes and everything, to me, I was just thinking comparing Punjabi Sikh culture with Western culture. I didn't really consider the Aboriginal culture out there, or, all the other religions and other attributes that could, influence or be, a part of a lifestyle. So, say as a community, as like one of the early things Sharanjit brought up, you go to Craigieburn per se, and it's a very Punjabi, suburb. It's going to be completely different if you go to, I can't think any off the top of my head, but if there's a completely different suburb where, maybe it's predominantly Muslims or Christians or Jewish people that are residing there. And it's also the same as if you live maybe in the outback region. So if you live in any of the local Aboriginal people's towns and everything. So it's very interesting to think about that. And Sharanjit, what are your thoughts on that, about the communities, and if you want to dive a little deep into what you brought up earlier?
Yeah, so I think one thing that I've and it's not just me, I think I've had conversations with a lot of young people about this as well, finding that balance between what Punjabi culture is and what Sikhi is. So sometimes I feel like we sort of dilute Sikhi and, try to, we just sort of put it in the context of it being a Punjabi religion. I think that, the topics like the caste system really pop up in there. Topics like, marriage, all those things kind of pop in there as well. But also, just growing up here, I realized that I sort of had this expectation of Punjabi culture to live up to a Western culture expectation. So, I kind of thought that Western culture is the benchmark for progress and what freedom means and how, a perfect society functions. So, yeah, I mean, I think that I'm still in that learning phase. I think most of us are still trying to learn to balance how to actually, you know, live in both of those worlds, I guess. So bit of a Hannah Montana thing going on.
Get the best of both worlds. But see, that brings up something interesting as well. I call this "do cultures divide us," but at the same time, they overlay themselves over one another. And the way you said that Punjabi and Sikh culture so often crosses over, everyone knows about that, and everyone, I'm sure, to some extent, believes that, you know, it's quite obvious that there are a lot of events or attributes or things that happen out in the real world where it's either, you know, something religious based, I guess I don't know how to word that, that's been diluted by the Punjabi culture, or it's something that's Punjabi that's somehow been brought into the religion.
For sure.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about that. So then, Jasdeep, what are your thoughts on how exactly, you know, the how Sikhism and like the religious aspect of, you know, the lives we live and the cultural aspect, how do you think they relate to one another, or do you have any examples of how they might, you know, differ in a sense?
Culture and religion are different things entirely, but they both form part of a person. So they both have their roles to play in an individual's life and an individual's lifestyle. So it's a common thing where they get kind of confused and mixed up. As to where everybody stands at this present time, I've noticed that people sort of develop their own values after being, you know, hitting teenage years and into their early 20s. And they sort of have to make their own decision as to which way they want to go. Do they want to focus on more the Punjabi culture and representing that, or do they want to move towards Sikhism as a religion and focus on representing that? And basically people find some sort of path that represents who they are and represents what their values are, and they try to find some form of combination between the two to represent that. Now, whether they're right or wrong, I can't say. Everybody just makes the decision that's best for themselves. But I can't think of any examples.
What about like rakdi and those kind of things?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I know that my family kind of still does it, but your family never really did it from the start.
Yeah.
And that's a really big difference between our families for sure.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
rakdi's the brother bracelet thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, to me, something like that, I never really thought about that stuff either.
Yeah, but a lot of people actually grew up without it. So I've got half of my family that's a bit more, you know, towards the Sikhi religious aspect, and they don't believe in rakdi. And then there's, you know, another half which is like my grandmother. She's you know, she was brought up in a very Punjabi sort of household, less religious. So she has a lot of expectations for us to carry that through. So it is a little bit of a tricky balance because I don't believe in the rakdi tradition. I even tried to, like, we tried to change it in our household where we tied on sisters and brothers tied on brothers. But to be honest, I feel like we're trying to include Punjabi culture into Sikhi and not Sikhi into Punjabi culture. So it's a bit weird, but just if your family never did it, and like that's something that I always was like, wow, they never do it. And yeah.
No, that's a good example of an actual real life one that it's very common when you think about it. I wouldn't have thought about it that example, and that's why it's so good to have other people here to bring up these kind of topics and stuff. So so far we've covered family, we've covered the generations, we've talked a little bit about Aman's experience going from New Zealand and Australia and some of what she's seen there itself. I'm going to open the floor. Is there anything that one of you three would like to just bring up to this discussion right now?
I think like generally like with that in terms of like religion and culture, I think it is like as young people, generally young people, like we're all trying to figure it out. And I think as you go along, whatever makes sense to you and whatever is comfortable for you, like that's obviously the way to go. And if that is a mixture of both, and that's also, you know, good for you and like beautiful. So I think it's like as people that are growing up in a Western country, something so foreign to our parents, obviously, I think for me growing up, it's about appreciating like our roots, as well as also understanding that our realities are much more different to the realities that our parents grew up with. So obviously at times they might have certain expectations from you that maybe you don't feel comfortable with any longer. And that's also important to recognize and, explain how that impacts you and how you want to move forward and how that might look different for you. So I think that's also a key point to keep in mind as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a very good, helpful way to put it, because it's funny as well when you think about it like that. You think, they have those expectations of us. I can imagine that in however many years I have eventually get a child and stuff. Will they grow up and it'll be the same thing? Because will Australian culture change then? Will I still be in Australia? And it's all those things. As youth, right now we're in a different state of mind to our parents. And the world's ever changing. You could, if anyone here is watching this show, and you could be in primary school still, or you could be early high school, and it already would be very different to us. And like I came out of high school like couple years ago. It's not that long, but then I can imagine it's already been it's so different just within this short, span of a few years. And it's important to know that. Maybe you are feeling, pulled or pushed in different directions. Maybe you're feeling pressure by, fellow students, or maybe you're feeling pressure by friends, teachers, or, maybe your parents itself, or anyone beyond that, community. And it's important to know that, if you do feel that, divide within yourself, that there are ways and there are examples that you can look up to for, kind of a guide to kind of help yourself and help others possibly get through this kind of moment in your life, or a moment that's probably going to continue for a while, because it's always going to come back in new forms. You're going to experience it one way, and then the next day or maybe months later you could experience it a total different way. And what I'll do, we're going to save more specific examples for future episodes, so that way we can have more time to discuss each example and go into more detail about it. So I'll just wrap this episode up here. But if there's any other thoughts any of you would like to share, I'll leave the floor for you guys right now. Otherwise, I'll just wrap this episode up.
I just have a sentence that I've been like kind of repeating to myself every day. In the past, I've been told that, I'm not appreciative of my Punjabi culture, not in like a, attacking sort of way, but more that I try to change and adapt it. I do like acknowledge that, we can do better as a culture and community, but it's okay to love your roots, but also acknowledge the fact that we can do better. So I'm very proud to be, Punjabi, and my parents are from Punjab. I'm not going to erase that, but I just think that we can do better. Yeah.
It's also important, like, to note just quickly that when all these cultures and not cultures, sorry, including the cultures, but these ideas were kind of presented to parents and the generations before, it was a different time and things were perceived differently. So we can always, when people say it would be more proper in a sense to do it this way, it's not in an aggressive tone, because we also are aware of the fact that the way things were back then, and why, that kind of mentality might have come up, or the action, or whatever the situation is. So on that note, I'm going to wrap this episode up here. So thank you to everyone for watching. Thank you for the 3 guests today. We've talked in general and kind of touched on a few different kind of areas in which, our culture, our religion, our lifestyle is torn between different worlds at the same time, kind of overlaid over one another in a, little stack of like Tetris blocks or something. There's that. I always have a weird analogy or a weird metaphor in my episodes. So, on the note of Tetris, I'd like to thank everyone for watching. Please like the video itself. Please leave a comment down below sharing your thoughts, and share this episode around. Voice of Youth is here for the youth. And in the next few episodes, we're going to be diving into more specific examples and events on cultures, on religions, on anything in our lifestyle that has affected us and making us, have the decision of, do I do this or do I do that? So thank you to the three guests once again tonight. Thank you to everyone for watching. So without further ado, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.